Government is brute force, and it's violent. Everything they do, it's either direct violence or a threat of violence. So it's rather ruthless. And the job of the founders was to try to devise a system that this was greatly reduced. So most of the Constitution says that it's a restraint on government, what the federal government can't do. It's not a restraint on the people, and unfortunately we have accepted this fact that there's so many mandates by the government. You know, and it's sad, we still, most Americans still believe we live in a free society, in a free country, and we're the freest country in the world, and that's why they hate us, because we're so free. But you know, if you look at what we do to our people, we should raise some questions about just how free we are. You know, we have 5% of the 1% of the population, or 5% of the population. We have the more prisoners than any other country in the world. So we must have not so much. I don't think of the American people as being bad people. I think of our government having too many laws telling us what to do. 25% of the total world population, prison population, China being second. And it's not for violent crimes. When you think of people now being imprisoned under the Patriot Act, under the drug laws, and think of all the people who have been imprisoned by the EPA for violating some obscure regulations about property rights. And it's really pretty annoying. And if we are to live in a free society, we have to address this overburden of the government regulating everything that we do. In a free society, yes, we have a right to our life. We have no right to another person's life. We have no right to defraud people or steal or hurt people. And if that were the case, this would be a pretty free and prosperous society. But unfortunately, we don't apply that rule that Bastiat talked about. And that is, if you and I live in a society like that, when we can't hurt other people and we can't take their property, why is it that we don't make the government live with that same rule and they can't do anything we can't do? Think of what it would be like if that rule could be applied to the TSA, you know. TSA, sometimes those agents at the gates do things that if any one of us in this audience did anything that to a stranger, how long would it take for us to be behind bars? So this was my recommendation. I wrote a piece of legislation to this effect that a TSA agent has no more authority to do what they do to the passengers than we have to our neighbors. And this would stop it immediately if they were, suspect. But no, what we do is, unfortunately, and we almost all have to do it. I fly on those airplanes. It's just terrible. And yet, you know, the resistance is going to cause such a calamity. But we have to eventually stand up to this. I mean, I keep thinking... what's happening at the airports and see the pictures of the groping of little kids and older women and grown men, and it just to me is, if we can watch that and see it on our television and accept this as being normal, we're in big trouble. This might be the litmus test, you know. So if the TSA is still doing what they're doing to us today, or even something worse in 5 years from now, believe me, I'm going to become a lot more pessimistic than I am today. Right now, I'm more optimistic because of the number of people who are joining the freedom movement and are looking at this, are getting upset about this, and know exactly why we have to curtail the power and scope of government. That's where my optimism comes from, and it comes also from the fact that I meet so many young people in the colleges now studying Austrian free market economics and talking about the Federal Reserve. And also this younger generation, as all of us here, I suppose, we're sick and tired of these wars that are going on that serves none of our benefits at all. I think think we're winning this argument, even though you wouldn't know that by some of the audiences and some of the debates going on, but I think the people are listening. I think they're tired of it. I mean, 10 years, don't you think that is enough time for people to transform the Middle East? I say that's enough. It's time not only to bring our troops home from the Middle East, but what about Korea and Vietnam and Germany, and just bring them all home? Troops home rather quickly. I don't think you can downsize the military overnight, even though we did that after World War II. We downsized rapidly, and we reduced the budget, cut the budget in half, and taxes went down, and we had a pretty good economy after the war finally ended. But even if you just brought all the troops home, just think of all those wages that they're getting. If they spent all that money in the economy, that would be a lot better stimulus than running up the debt even more and having another stimulus package. We have too many wars going on, not only overseas, that kind of war, but we have the government's committing war against us all the time. And I think about the war on drugs. What good has come from this war on drugs? I detest the use of drugs. I detest the abuse of the so-called illegal drugs. I detest the abuse that has accumulated with the legal drugs, the prescription drugs in this country. We use way too many. And I think we live in a climate today where there's so many psychotropic drugs, and kids especially are put on these too readily. So the drug war in many ways has been a real disaster. You know, it's basically the modern drug war started in the early 70s under that great Republican president, Richard Nixon. He had something to do with getting rid of the gold standard. He's not my favorite president, I want you to know that. But in the last 40 years, we've spent over $1 trillion on prohibition. And I thought we tested prohibition a few years back. You know, and it didn't work. And you know, when they prohibited people from drinking alcohol, you know, they kept drinking alcohol. They did. You know, I understand when prohibition went into effect, it took about 1/2 hour for the bootleggers to be bringing booze across the borders. I mean, they were all ready for it. But not only with that, not only did the criminals sell the booze and cause so much crime and death from that, but then they went to producing alcohol that was less than pure, and people died from that. So, but they rejected the notion that grown-up people have a right to decide what they can do with their own bodies. And the problem there, whether it's drugs or whatever, or personal habits, the assumption is that if you legalize freedom of choice in whatever, that freedom for you to choose something means that those of us who support that position, that we endorse what you do. So I endorse your freedoms, but I'll tell you, I'll bet there's a few in here that use their freedoms in a way I might not want to endorse those freedoms. But no, there can be abuses. But it's sort of like religion. We understand the right of picking and choosing our own religion or no religion. It's not for the government to be involved. But once the government decides that, yes, we're going to allow you to do the things that we sanction, then all of a sudden they get involved. Then they get control of the public school system. Then they wonder who's going to control the curriculum. And there aren't any easy answers for that. It becomes a little less troublesome if your local school board's the highest order of government official to deal with it, and the local people deal with it. But once you get involved with the federal government managing our schools through things like Department of Education, there's no way where you can say you can devise a perfect curriculum. That's why I say we don't need the federal government in. We can start by saving some money by getting rid of the Department of Education. You know, one thing that is not talked about a whole lot on the drug war, which I sincerely believe it compounds our problem, that if you look at the people arrested for drugs, a large majority are minorities. And if you're likely to get put in prison for nonviolent use of drugs, it's way out of proportion to the population. And immediately I thought, well, that must be because minorities use more drugs. But you know, studying it is not true. You know, all groups of people of all races in this country use drugs essentially about the same. But there is a lot of discrimination in the courts. Also, I had over the years, and I've written about this, how I've changed my attitude about the use of the death penalty, especially at the federal level. I've come to the conclusion, at the federal level, we don't need a death penalty. They don't know how to do anything else, so I don't know how they can impose a death penalty on anybody. The problem is, whether it's the enforcement of the death penalty or the drug issues, poor people get a short shrift on that. They are not treated as well. So I think that we should be honest with ourselves on this issue, because there is, I think that's the last place where real discrimination exists. This other stuff that we're accused of so often of being discriminating against, and we need more affirmative action programs, I don't buy into that. But I really do think that in our court system there's some major problems still there.